You're listening to the Assembly Call IU podcast and postgame show, the place where Indiana fans across the globe hang out online after every IU basketball game. Join us for our live broadcasts on Thursday nights and immediately following every IU game at our website, assemblycall.com. That's assemblycall.com.
This week's edition of Banner Monday is coming right up. Before we get to that, a quick word about tickets from our sponsor, SeatGeek. As you know, getting tickets online can be far too complicated. There are hundreds of sites and varying levels of reliability for each of them, so it's hard to know who to trust. But that is why SeatGeek is the way to go. SeatGeek pulls millions of tickets into one place so that you can easily find the seats that you want for a price you're willing to pay. There is nothing quite like being there in person, and SeatGeek will get you closer to the action for a great value. Just imagine what the atmospheres at Simon Skjodt Assembly Hall are going to be like this season. You want to be there. This is a special year with a special roster. You're going to want to get to Simon Skjodt Assembly Hall, see this team play live, and SeatGeek is the way to go when you want to do that. You know, SeatGeek is actually designed to make the ticket buying experience easier than it's ever been. And they do that by searching multiple ticket sites and grading every ticket based on value. So they help you immediately identify the best seats that fit your budget, and every purchase is fully guaranteed, so you can shop for tickets on SeatGeek with confidence. That's why I have the SeatGeek app on my phone, and I use it for sporting events, for concerts, really for any type of live event. SeatGeek is the first place that I look for tickets. Best of all, Assembly Call listeners get $20 off of your first SeatGeek purchase. So just download the SeatGeek app, enter the promo code ASSEMBLY today, and you'll get $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. That's promo code ASSEMBLY. SeatGeek. Life's an event. We have the tickets. And now here's this week's edition of Banner Monday. And welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Banner Monday, where we kick off each week by doing what IU fans love more than anything else, talking hoops, IU hoops, Big Ten hoops, and deep dives into basketball strategy and concepts. We do it all here every Monday, and we're happy to have you here with us. This is the second edition of Banner Monday, and it is our 433rd episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the afternoon of Monday, October 29th, 2018. I am your host, Jerod Morris. And let's begin this edition of the Assembly Call, how we begin every edition of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment.
And Indiana is the national champion.
When it comes down, Indiana will be champion.
Smart takes the shot.
The Hoosiers have won the national championship.
Today's banner moment occurred on Sunday afternoon at Bankers Life Fieldhouse in Indianapolis, where Indiana took on Loyola Chicago in a close scrimmage. And while specific details about the scrimmage have not been easy to come by all reports and whispers, they suggest the same thing, and that is that Indiana dominated. Now, obviously, you never want to overreact to back-channel reports about a private scrimmage that didn't count, and we won't. But I think we can all agree that hearing the Hoosiers played really well against a team ranked ahead of them in the preseason AP poll is a much better sign than the alternative. So we'll take it and hope that it's a sign of things to come this season when the games are public and the results count. Okay, now let me introduce my esteemed co-host for our Monday Mailbag. He is a columnist for The Big Lead, a co-host of The Hangover, and in an era of specialists, he's one of the few sports media members left who is actually worth listening to as a generalist.
I pretty much have an opinion on everything.
He is Ryan Phillips. Ryan, any opening rants before we pop open the mailbag here and start answering some questions? You're muted, by the way, which a lot of people probably appreciate, but doesn't work so well for this.
No, I feel like you mute me, and
I didn't,
because I would never do that. No, nothing really for me this week. I thought it was big that we heard that, of course, that the scrimmage went well, and regardless of whether it was dominance or whether they won or whatever you're thinking, and whatever the rumors are, I think that it's good that there were at least positive reports coming out about it, and that's always a good thing. So that's really where my focus is. Also, I wanted to mention that on Friday, when I was guest hosting the morning show at 1090 here in San Diego all week, I got to talk to Dick Vitale on the air, which was just a bucket list moment for me. I've spoken to Dick before, but to actually get to interview him was pretty awesome. And
this is where Andy calls you out for name dropping.
I know. Well, I usually call you out for name dropping, but in this instance, I had a question prepared to ask Mr. Vitale about Indiana, but we ran out of time and I couldn't slip it in. So I apologize to everybody. I'm basically ranting on myself for not getting an IU question. I apologize to all the listeners who tuned in for that and didn't get their fix of IU hoops. Come on, dude.
That definitely gets a come on, dude.
I know.
That's cool though, man. Congratulations.
It was. No, I mean, and there were two of us asking questions, so I couldn't just open with the Indiana question. But Dick thinks that Kansas is number one this year pretty significantly. So,
meh.
Yeah, well, that's who he picked. And I asked his reasons about it.
A big meh to that. All right. Well, here's what is on tap for us this week on Banner Monday. We're going to do our listener mailbag as we always do. Then our Big Ten Roundup with Mike DeCourcy. And then Ben Ladner is back for another edition of Basketball 201. We're going to dive into ball screens more, talk about some other ball screen coverages. And then at the end, I will do a quick opponent preview for Southern Indiana because there's a game this week, Thursday. It doesn't count, but it's still a game. And I know that we're all looking forward to it. So all of that is coming on this edition of Banner Monday. Before we get to that, before we get to our mailbag, I do want to remind you real quick about the best way to shop online for great deals on IU basketball and football tickets. Just remember this URL, iutickets.shop. It will take you right to SeatGeek, where you can immediately find the best deals on IU basketball tickets, other sports tickets, concert tickets, and more. And as a bonus, you can use the promo code ASSEMBLY to get $20 off your first purchase. And when you use that URL, iutickets.shop, we actually get paid a commission for referring you, so it is a great way to support the show. Again, the URL is iutickets.shop.
Thank you.
All right, Ryan, let's dive into some of these questions. Of course, we take some of the leftover questions from our Thursday night show, and then I put out a call in our private IU basketball community for some additional questions, and we got some good ones. We're actually going to lead off with one of those questions. I really like this question from Alex. Ryan, he says, what are your top 3 signs that you're going to be looking for during the early games to project that this team is a Sweet 16 or better possibility? And I suppose the caveat is that we're not going to know that early in the season because so many things can change. But what are those early signs that you look for to say, okay, this team is at least on the right track?
Well, I think, and you marked some notes in our little group thing here, so I don't want to really step on what you. Well, you
can if that's what you believe. You can.
But number one would be 3-point shooting and free throw shooting improved. Just shooting in general improved. Yeah. I think that's the main thing, and a lot of that has to do with A, development from the guys who are already there, and B, the new guys coming in. I think also you're looking at just a general chemistry between the guys, because there are a lot of new guys on this team, and I think the general chemistry of guys playing together is going to be interesting to see right from the beginning, because sometimes that takes until, say, January to develop. But these guys have been on the court a lot together in the preseason and in over the summer and stuff. So I'd be interested to see how that develops. And I think number 3 for me is guys who who have been on campus improving, and that's Justin Smith and Race Thompson. How much are they involved, and how big can they be for this team? Because if they are, I think that you're looking at a really fast development from these guys. If they're not really that far improved, then you're going to look at depth as having to step up and really fill some of those gaps. But I think those 2 guys are going to be huge. So that 3-point shooting and just general chemistry, particularly chemistry offensively. I feel like this team is going to play well defensively.
Yeah. I mean, it goes without saying that we're both taking for granted that Juwan Morgan and Romeo Langford are going to play basically, somewhat resembling an All-American level. So that's, if either one of those guys is, playing significantly worse than expectations, that would not be good. But, I mean, the 3-point shooting and free throw shooting is obvious. I think consistency at point guard, clearly, that's a big question mark. We want to see some type of advancement there. Yeah, and then, the other thing that I said, I mean, I think you're right on the offense, but I also want to see coherent defense. And not that the defense is going to be perfect early on, but really to see that the gains made last year continue. And there will be some hiccups, but not just the major, just gashings that we saw Indiana take early last season, just to see that things look a lot more solid, and then it looks like they've really built on a solid defensive foundation. And I think, between the two of us, we pretty much covered every aspect that we could. But that's really what you want to see. I mean, this is a team that was mediocre last year, had a lot of weaknesses and only a few things to hang their hats on. So if you're talking about not only getting back to the NCAA tournament, but being a Sweet 16 or better possibility, there's a lot of things that need to improve. So I think those are the major ones, and there's probably still some more beyond those, but I think those are the ones that will have the biggest impact. All right, Ryan, here's kind of a fun question here from Josiah. He says, when a blockbuster movie of the FBI's NCAA corruption case inevitably hits theaters, who are your top picks for its all-star cast and crew? Director, lead actor, actress, and bonus, give the movie a title and a tagline. And this is a hard one to do, like off the top of your head, but do you have any
I want yours
thoughts?
first, because I see it here, and I really like it.
So, yes, I just think it's pretty obvious. You just call it Blue Chips 2. The tagline is, it's still all about money. I forgot to pull my little sound drops up here from Blue Chips, but
it's about money.
There you go. So it's still about money. And then I would say just let Nick Nolte play all the characters, like it's an Eddie Murphy movie. He's everybody. He's Merle Code. He's the defense attorney. He's the judge. He's Bill Self. Like everybody who's in it, you just let Nick Nolte play them, except for Matt Nover, who plays the role of Brian Bowen. And they switch out $100,000 for a tractor because that element of Blue Chips needs to stay. That's what I would do.
I would say like the Wolf of Sneaker Street or something. I can't think of a name off the top of my head, but I think we could get Skeletor to play Rick Pitino. I think you get I don't know. Let me put it. To be honest, I think you could get a great cast willing to play this drama because it was so ridiculous and so crazy. But yeah, it's definitely, I think it's all about the money, or it's still all about the money is a great tagline for that movie. But yeah, off the top of my head, that's really tough to do. I'm sorry.
It is, but it's a great question though, and hopefully
it is a great question. I wish I had like a week to ponder that because I'd come up with it. Maybe next week I'll give my entry. So
okay.
Josiah, I will come back next week. I promise. I'll think about this and put in a.
It's one of the only times Ryan's ever been stumped and not had an
really
immediate opinion on something.
There's a lot there.
Congratulations to Josiah.
Lot there to digest.
It's a really well done question. Okay, this is from Jeff. 2 early games on IU's schedule drawing interest. How do you think IU matches up with Marquette and Arkansas? And what will the result from those games tell us about the Hoosiers early in the season? So, Arkansas replaces a lot of people. It's kind of hard to project them. They do have an elite big man in Daniel Gafford, potential lottery pick. So that's going to be a really interesting matchup for Juwan or whoever ends up matched up on him. And obviously that's a road game. I don't have a whole lot of insight on those guys. From a Marquette perspective, they profile like some of the more frustrating Tom Crean teams where they are elite offensively. I mean, super elite, like, third or fourth in effective field goal percentage. They've got a couple of guys that can shoot 45% or better from downtown. I mean, they are really going to challenge Indiana's perimeter defense with Marcus Howard and a couple of the other guys they have, but they are awful defensively. They were 182nd in the country last year defensively. So, I like Indiana's chances in that game because Indiana projects to be a much more balanced team. Now, if Marquette just goes off and hits 12, 13, 14 three-pointers and Indiana doesn't have an answer, we saw what kind of trouble, even at home, that can bring. But, that's kind of the big kind of contrast of styles there, and you certainly hope that Indiana's three-point shooting is a little bit better. They don't need to outshoot Marquette, but I think they've got to at least kind of, not let the three-point margin be too huge. But I like their chances in both of those games. I mean, the Marquette game's at home. Again, I like Indiana's balance in that game. And even though the Arkansas game is on the road, I think Indiana's much more balanced and has more experience than them, which, to me, gives them the advantage early in the season. What do you think about those two games, Ryan?
Well, anytime you play a Mike Anderson team, you're going to have to, it's an awkward system to play against because it's that 94 feet of hell or what, where they just press you and push you and get you to play fast. It's going to be a huge game for the point guard play to be, to really step up. The good thing, Indiana has several people who can handle the ball. It's not going to be all on one guy. Juwan Morgan can bring the ball up if you need him to. I think that's going to help Indiana there. But still, it's an awkward system to play for, especially on short notice. It's one thing when you're in the SEC and you play it twice a year and you get to practice for it all the time and you're used to it. It's tough to practice for that on a short week. So I would say that's going to be really difficult, and that's going to fall on Devontae Green, Rob Finney, Romeo Langford, just anybody who can bring the ball up. That's going to be a tough game for them. They got to really show some maturity and confidence. Marquette, I echo what you said. incredible offensive team, shoot a ton of threes. Saw them in Maui last year and was very impressed with the way they shot the ball. But you're right. They're a sieve defensively. They're terrible. And so if you can attack the paint on them, and if you can attack the paint, it's going to open up the 3-point line for you. So I would say attack the paint, attack the paint, attack the paint, and then worry about hitting shots from the outside. You've got to be able to counter that, though, and defend the 3-point line. Make them shoot off the dribble, make them shoot inside the 3-point line, make them try and beat you in the paint, because I don't think they can. So really, it is. I mean, look, if you face a team like Marquette and they hit 16 threes on you, you're going to lose. So you've got to defend the 3-point line. There's this isn't a team you dare to shoot threes on you. It's a team you defend the 3-point line, make them beat you in other ways.
Of course, even if they go off from 3-point shooting, they were so bad defending the interior last year, you may just be able to kind of bleed them to death with layups and
I
free
certainly
throws.
don't want to give them a chance.
No. But, I mean, they're really bad defensively, so it's going to be interesting. It's ironic that they're coached by Wojo, too, who was, known as the floor-slapping, head of Duke's defense back when they played defense.
Yeah, well, he's taken after his godfather of a coach and Mike Krzyzewski, and not really preaching defense very well.
A walking skeleton with a hairpiece.
Yeah, that'd be him. But I do say bust out some good lines on this show.
You do. Okay, this comes from Ben Malcolmson, and then we actually had another question from Derek, and I thought they fit really well together. So Ben asks, what kind of season do you envision for a guy like Race Thompson? Where do his opportunities for minutes come from? And then Derek said, Freddie McSwain popped up in my newsfeed recently because he is now in the G League on, I think, the Canton team. And Derek says, that got me thinking, is there a McSwain-type player on this roster, a guy who muscles the hard rebound over taller players, who could take on the role of going out and getting 10 boards when it's needed? To me, I think Race Thompson is a much better overall player than Freddie McSwain. There's no question. I mean, he can shoot the ball. Yeah. He's got an offensive game. But I think if you're looking for a McSwain-type player in terms of a guy who's, kind of a bench player, can come in and really be tough, get you rebounds, I think Race Thompson is the closest to that of anybody. Jake Forrester would be another guy that you would say, but he actually wasn't a great rebounder in high school. I think he has some work to do on his rebounding.
He was also on a ridiculous team, so it took.
Yeah, and I think he will be fine. But I like, if you're talking about who would you think would be the first of those guys to go out and get you 10 rebounds? I think Race Thompson is going to be a guy that right off the bat is a real rugged interior player that does some of that dirty work that we got from Freddie McSwain last year.
I certainly think, to answer Ben's question, I don't know what numbers to envision for Race Thompson. Again, we haven't seen him that much, but what I've heard and what I've seen just makes me think that he's going to be an impact guy off the bench. And I think his minutes will come from backing up Juwan Morgan, really, and playing a similar role to Juwan Morgan, inside out, outside in, a guy who can defend multiple positions, who can step on the floor and shoot it. I don't think that's look, if Race Thompson is standing beyond the 3-point line for more than a few possessions, that's not what you want, but he can do that in a pinch. And if he's wide open, they're going to tell him to take that shot. Yeah. But he's an inside-out guy who can do a lot for you. He's big and strong. Jerod, I still remember when we were on the floor last year when we were in town, and we both looked at each other like, okay, yeah, he's a lot bigger than we thought.
Mark your bingo cards, everybody.
Yeah, not just height, but he's a big dude. He really is. And he's athletic and can move around. So
he is.
I think that's, he's a guy who can do some things. And we saw in the scrimmage at Hoosier Hysteria that he's a guy you got to account for on the floor. So I think he's going to be really good this year. We've kind of all three been predicting that he would be an impact guy since last year when he was redshirting. So
he's a top 100 recruit. I mean, he was a higher rated recruit than Juwan was coming out of high school. If you want, for context.
Yeah. So. And he would have been, I think he would have been the second or third highest recruit in this group.
After Hunter. He would have been after Jerome Hunter.
Third. And honestly, if he had played his senior year of high school, he may have been even higher. We don't know because he only played through his junior year. So he might have even bumped up that list. I think that those are that he's the guy that you would think of in that role. And I do think he's going to be an impact guy right away. He'll be one of the first guys off the bench, I think, for sure, in that opener.
Yep. All right, this question is from Abe. There's a lot of talk of Devontae versus Rob at the point. Do you think we are overlooking the lineup that features Rob at the 1 and Devontae at the 2? Could Rob facilitate and free Devontae up to become a reliable third scorer? So I think, look, Romeo Langford is going to play as many minutes at the 2, quote unquote, the 2 as possible. So if you're doing this lineup, it's either going to be kind of in short spurts and Romeo's off the court, or you're going to be playing those guys with Romeo. I don't see that happening a ton. I can see it happening next year. I think Rob and Devontae could get a lot of time together, but that's not a lineup I would project to see a ton this year. I guess unless both of those guys are just playing so well, shooting so well that you can't keep them off the court. But I think Indiana will be more likely to go bigger and longer this year and use those guys more, to kind of sub for each other as opposed to playing them together. We'll see it at some point, sure, but I don't think it's going to be something we're going to see a lot of.
I could definitely see the two of them playing together because Devontae
this year.
Yeah. Because then moving Romeo to the 3, maybe going smaller with like the Justin Smith at the 4 and Morgan at the 5. I mean, that's it's going to depend on the matchup. It's going to depend on the flow of the game and everything. But certainly Devontae can play off the ball. We saw that last year plenty. If he's bringing consistency, and I don't think that there's a 1, 2, 3 positioning with Indiana and Archie Miller. I think that it's just sort of 3, 4 perimeter guy or 3, 4 guys who are going to be out on the perimeter doing what they do, and one guy in the post. I really don't think that there's this devotion to having a set point guard and a set shooting guard. I think especially if you're playing a team like Arkansas that needs a ball hand, where you need multiple ball handlers.
Okay, yeah, in a game like that, I could see it.
Yeah,
but do you think Archie's going to want to give up that length defensively? I mean, that often to play those guys together?
If you have Romeo, if you have Justin Smith, and you have Morgan, you've kind of got some solid length. And then if you can put the other two on the 2 guards on the other team, I think you'd be okay. Again, I don't think that this isn't going to be a starting lineup. I just think that we could see it certainly for stretches of time. You could even go really large with a lineup like that with those 2 guys, get Romeo off the floor when he needs a break. Especially Romeo's not going to play 38 minutes a game. He's going to be off the floor for 10 minutes a game easily, average of 10 minutes a game easily for the year. So you do need to mix and match and figure out ways to score. Devontae can be a lighted up scorer when he gets free, especially on the perimeter. So I think that having 2 ball handlers on the floor will be fine at some point, or 2 primary ball handlers, just depending on the matchups. But yeah, you will have to make up for that with the guys you have around them. But I don't think it'll be that rare. And we know Devontae can fill it up when he gets hot. So, yeah, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. It'll be interesting. Again, we don't know how Archie Miller is going to deploy all this talent. That's the big question, because he's never had this much talent before. So how does he deploy it? It's kind of fun speculating, because we have no idea how he's going to do it.
Been a whole lot of speculating this offseason.
A whole lot of speculating. I don't know about you, Jerod, but I'm 100% ready for some games.
I'm so ready for games. So ready for games. Okay, last question, and then we're going to get to our Big Ten Roundup. And we have to go to you, the shot doctor. This is from Steven, and this is a subject that we've talked about too. But what about the Hoosiers' free throw percentage this season? Specifically, can a team be coached to a significantly higher completion rate? Is it mechanics, mindset, or both? We both think Indiana is going to improve as a free throw shooting team. If nothing else, just kind of the law of averages helping after last year's abomination. But what do you think about free throw shooting? Is that something where you can really, coaching can have a big impact?
Sure. I do think there's a lot of it that's mental, and I do think it's as crazy and stupid as this sounds, it's contagious. I think if guys are not confident in the free throw line, that passes on down the line.
We saw that last year.
If your most reliable free throw shooter isn't hitting free throws, everybody starts to question everything. And so I would say, yeah, I think it is mental. I think there is a physical aspect to it where you need to work on mechanics and you need to really practice it. But I think practice is what makes free throws better, not necessarily mechanics specifically. But I do think there are mechanical issues you can sort out. But I think that just getting to the line, getting used to it, and putting up shots will make you better. The question is, who's working with them with their shots? Personally, I think it should be me. But it is also, I do think mindset is huge at free throws, because there's nothing distracting you except for your own brain when you're at the free throw line. You don't have a guy on you. You're not catching and worrying about rotating the ball to a certain part on your body and then getting it up. You are just staying there yourself and the hoop. And it's about what's going on between the ears for 90% of it.
Fred, call me.
Call him, Fred.
Call me.
By the way, we have a countdown in the chat right now for the exhibition game. 3 days, 3 hours, 35 minutes, 50 seconds. Till we have actual Indiana basketball. All right. Good job. Any final thoughts there, Ryan, before we sign off for the segment?
I'm just so ready for something to actually happen.
You'll be there Thursday night, right? So
Yep.
we can get some live game reps in together for the exhibition.
Should be. Is
Okay.
that going to double as our assembly call radio?
It will double as assembly call radio.
Sweet.
Yes, it will.
All right.
Okay, coming up on the assembly call, we're going to be joined by our special guest, Mike DeCourcy from BTN and the Sporting News for this week's installment of our Big Ten Roundup. We'll discuss his thoughts on secret scrimmages and go best case, worst case for each Big Ten team. Stick with us here on the assembly call. Welcome back to Banner Monday. Each week here in our second segment, we zoom out just a bit to look at how things are going across the Big Ten Conference, not just with Indiana. And there's no one better to provide insight on Big Ten basketball than Mike DeCourcy, who covers Big Ten hoops for BTN in addition to his columns for the Sporting News. Mike, welcome back to Banner Monday.
Thanks, Jerod. Great to be back.
Absolutely. So, one of the things that we're seeing, everybody, right now, as we were just talking about, is kind of starved for basketball to start, especially Indiana fans, with not much to look forward to for the rest of the football season, it doesn't appear. And one of the things that we're seeing, and that is kind of having to satisfy our desire for any type of basketball news, are these closed scrimmages, these secret scrimmages. And it's funny because some teams report out a ton. Like I think for the Michigan State one, we got a full box score. And for Indiana's against Loyola on Sunday, we've really gotten precious, few details about it. I'm just kind of curious to get your general thoughts about these close scrimmages. Do you think that they're a good idea? Obviously, the teams have to give up a public exhibition game to do them. Do you think that they're a good idea? Do you think they're beneficial for the teams who choose to do them?
I do. I think they're terrific because you get the opportunity to play whatever competition you choose, and you certainly can choose competition you think will challenge you, give you a particular look, and give you, you can choose a scrimmage opponent that you think the other coach is really going to be someone that's difficult to go against. If let's say you're going against a John Beilein in the regular season, you can go against somebody you feel is really going to make you work. And so I think all that's good. The part that doesn't add up for me is the secret part. It just doesn't make any sense. And I understand you're not supposed to televise them and all that sort of stuff. And they don't want to make them full-fledged exhibition games. But I've had a 10-year battle, or however long it's been, with the NCAA over this. And eventually, I can't call it a battle anymore because I've given up. But the idea that no reporters can go in there is ludicrous. I mean, they're dictating media policy to their members, and they don't have a right to do that. And I've talked to the NCAA about this, and they say, well, you need to go through the practice, through the way that the legislative process, and you have to get people to sponsor. And I'm like, no, this is an interpretation. It is not in the language of the rule to say no reporters can be allowed inside. It's in the interpretation of how it's supposed to be publicized. And as I said, if you are a coach and the two coaches don't want any media in there, that's fine. I mean, that's their prerogative. But I know that there are places where every practice is open all year round until they get to one of these scrimmages, and then they're not allowed in.
Well, if there's any place that I can sign to support you in that, I agree. Last question on that. Every now and then we do see some details come out. Is there anything that you look at or kind of take seriously from the results? Like any kind of specific type of detail from these scrimmages that you think is actually worth paying attention to, or does it just depend on the context?
Yeah, it for us, it really is. We don't know what happens in any of them. We don't know who plays, who doesn't play. I mean, at times, like you said, you get the box score but you don't really understand the context. I mean, I know I've been told about scrimmages, and I've never been to one. I've been told about scrimmages that where like one team will just play zone the whole time or a whole period and just so the other team can get a look at it. And then they will do that to each other, and those kinds of things come up. So you really can't read a lot into the results or that sort of thing. You really just kind of have to wait for the first public exhibition or the first game or in some cases, if you have enough of a following, you have interest that a blue-white game or a red and white game or whatever somebody might play publicly so that their teams can get a look so their fans can get a look at their team.
Yeah. All right, well, let's turn our attention to the Big Ten. Obviously, Big Ten play won't start for a little while, but we want your insight on these Big Ten teams, and so I thought it might be fun to kind of go best case, worst case with each team. Last week you gave us your top 4, but this will give us a chance to get your general thoughts on each team before the season starts, and we'll just go in alphabetical order here. So let's go best case, worst case for the Illinois Fighting Illini.
Well, I think the best case is that they just make a step forward, that they're able to use their young players to say, a year from now, we're going to be something. We're going to be someone that you have to really take seriously, and that they continue to build their culture. They had a transition year under Brad Underwood that didn't go probably quite the way they wanted it to, and I think that they certainly went through a year in which there were a lot of people who are no longer in the program. And I'll exempt the Ron Black from this because he was terrific. But there were a lot of people who are no longer with the program who clearly did not have both feet into that transition. And so now you've got people that want to be there. And I don't expect this to be a great year for Illinois, but that's the best case, is that they make progress toward being a factor next season.
And what's the worst case for them? I guess that it's kind of a continuation of last year?
Yeah, I think so. I don't anticipate that. And maybe the worst case scenario for them is that they have a tough year and that their fans get discouraged. And that's why remembering the best case is really important, because I don't think it's about wins and losses for Illinois this year. I think it's about building a culture and seeing individual and collective progress.
All right, best case, worst case for the Indiana Hoosiers.
Yeah, best case is they figure out point guard and they're a factor in the championship race, because they have everything else that you need to be that, especially if Deron Davis comes back healthy and able to give them another look inside and as many minutes. I mean, we're talking about somebody who's capable of playing 30. I don't think that they're going to ask Deron to do that, but he's certainly a player who is good enough to do that. And so if they're able to get him back and get the point guard thing figured out, there's no reason why Indiana's not a team that contends, I should say, for the Big Ten title. And what does contention mean for me? I think it really means that you're one of those teams that is playing in the last couple of weeks for one of the first 2-day buys in the Big Ten tournament.
And what do you think is the worst case for Indiana?
Well, I think the worst case is that they go through another year in which everything is figured out except who to get the basketball and how to get the offense started. Because there were times last year when everything was really rolling except for that factor, and that they really had to fight their way through that. And I thought that they did a nice job with that a lot of times. But then after you'd play 38 great minutes, it still was always nagging at you. I do think that they're going to get better at that position. Like I said, best case is they get good at that position. Next, the more realistic case is they get good enough there to be an NCAA tournament team. Okay.
How about the Iowa Hawkeyes?
Well, the best case is that they start to guard somebody, and becoming again, I'm not even saying a good defensive team. I think just one that isn't awful, and somebody that, maybe ranks in the 80 to 100 range in defensive efficiency. Because if they do that, then they are a team that will contend for a tournament bid, because offensively they're about as good as anybody in the Big Ten.
Yeah, they really are. Okay, how about the Maryland Terrapins?
Interesting. I was really surprised when I saw the Julius Erving Award list. The young man Wiggins at Maryland was on the list, and he was ranked coming out of high school by 24/7 Sports. I think around 42. And so best case scenario is that the people who did the Irving list are right. Because if they've got an Irving list level wing, then they've got everything they need. I mean, they've got size in the front court with Bruno Fernando, and Anthony Cowan's as good a two-way point guard as there is in the league. And so I was really shocked by Wiggins' inclusion on that list. But if they're right, then they have a lot fewer questions than we think they do.
Just a random question. If you were starting a Big Ten team, which point guard would you rather build around? Anthony Cowan or Cassius Winston?
That's a great question, because Cowan is a far better defender than Cassius Winston. But Cassius Winston is a guy who can shoot 55% from three for an extended period of time. We're not talking about a good shooter. We're talking about a great shooter, although he does limit his his tries. He doesn't take a ton of them because he doesn't take a ton of shots. I probably would pick Cowan because I know that I'm covered at both ends.
Yeah.
But if I wanted to build an offense first team, Cassius Winston's an excellent choice.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to Michigan. Best case, worst case.
Yeah, Michigan's best case is that they become offensively proficient, given that they lost the key factors in their offense from a year ago. Duncan Robinson's 3-point shooting, Mo Wagner's inside-outside versatility. And obviously what Muhammad Ali Abdur-Rahman was able to play 3 positions. And so they lose all that. So if they can find a way to fight their way through what they lost to become a proficient offensive team, then their defense takes over. And I'll be stunned if their defense isn't even better than it was a year ago, because they're so much more dynamic than they were last season. So I think that's their best case scenario. And their worst case scenario is that defensively that they backslide and become more like the typical Michigan Bayline team was. Because last year was an aberration for them. I think that they're trending in the right direction. I think that's what the real truth is. But they could trick us and go backward defensively. How
about the Spartans? Best case, worst case?
Yeah, I think the best case is that they're able to find a way to make Nick Ward a 30-minute player. If he is that, then that means everything's working for them that they need to work. Because he struggles in terms of his conditioning, or has. They say he's in better shape now. He has struggled with fouls, and so that's always been an issue. And it's really, it's forced Tom Izzo to be really creative in games. I mean, he's always had a lot of bodies to put in that spot, but it's not the same as having your first choice. So they've had to mix and match and do different things. So if Nick Ward can average in the ballpark of 30 minutes a game, I think that's their best case scenario. And the worst case scenario is that, I talked before about Cassius Winston not being a great defender. Well, they don't have off the bench Tum Tum Nair to come in and bail them out situationally from that problem. So if Nick Ward isn't able to play 30 minutes and you still have a problem defensively at the point, then defensively, you're not the kind of team that you need to be in order to win a Big Ten title.
And there's no Jaren Jackson there to cover up for mistakes either, because they were unbelievable defensively last year. Unbelievable. Minnesota and Richard Pitino. Best case,
we
worst
already
case.
see the worst case scenario starting.
Did they have an injury? Did I see that on Twitter today?
Yes. Curry is down and will be down for 4 to 6 weeks.
Man.
And it's exactly what they didn't need. He had a surgery procedure on his knee. He missed all of last year with the knee injury. And is this a continuation of last year? They don't have enough guys to say, okay, we can lose a first-rate Big Ten quality starting player and be fine. And they just don't. And so the 4 to 6 weeks, I mean, if he had this surgery, or, whatever circumstance had presented itself that he needed to have this surgery back in September or August, then, I mean, he wouldn't be in the kind of condition you want, but he would still be able to play in the games that are starting a week from now.
I hate injuries. That's a shame.
Yeah, really bad news for Minnesota. And, I especially when it's one after the other. I mean, I work with Robbie Hummel at BTN, and I know what he went through and was able to fight back from, but it's still a shame.
What do you kind of see as their best case? Because, they've kind of been a trendy sleeper pick because they're predicted to be really good last year. And, with good health, their roster projected to be much better this year.
Yeah. And so I think the best case for them is that they're able to survive Curry's absence, and Amir Coffey is able to be a superstar. And he's first team all Big Ten quality player if he's healthy. And a year ago, he was not. If he is able to be a superstar, and they're fiddling around with him as a point guard or an instigator of their offense, that worries me a little bit, because although I think he's capable of doing that, that sort of maybe mutes his greatness a little bit. It'd be the old philosophy of weakening your team at 2 positions. And I know that may not be their ultimate answer, but whatever it is their answer, if he can dominate periodically from that spot, I think that's a best case scenario for Minnesota, and then they're a factor.
You seem pretty high on Nebraska, so what's your best case, worst case for Tim Miles' Cornhuskers?
Well, the best case, the first thing that has to happen for Nebraska to be special is that Glenn Watson has to be all in as a point guard, which Tim Miles said on Media Day. I think we talked about this a week ago, that he is. And then the second thing is Isaiah Roby taking a huge step forward. That's another thing we talked about. But I think going from being a guy that everybody in the league gulps when he gets the ball because what can he do? I mean, because there are so many different things he can do, to being a guy who just goes ahead and shoves that ball down people's throats more often than he does. Those two things happen, and Nebraska's right there. Worst case for Nebraska is that everybody's the same as last year. Isaiah Roby's still somebody that's really talented, but not all the way there. Hey, I watched Kenyon Martin go through that for 3 years and then become the best player in the country. So it doesn't happen overnight for everybody. So Roby's no guarantee to be a great player, and then Glenn's no guarantee to accept the point guard role. And then James Palmer, if he's just the same as he was last year, I think that's fine. But for so many of their players, they need to improve in order to be able to handle the expectation that goes with being expected to make the tournament.
How about Northwestern? Big disappointment last year. What's their best case, worst case?
Yeah, the best case, first of all, is that Ryan Taylor is what I saw him to be in practice on the day before Big Ten Media Day. He was just, it was almost like, I don't want to oversell it, but remember MJ with the shrug in that Portland game in the NBA Finals? It was like that. He was making so many plays and so many shots, it became almost funny. So that's the first thing. And then I think they have to figure out point guard. Their problem at point guard is probably more profound than anybody's in the league. And so they have to have an answer for that. I know that their thought process is to initiate through other actions, but they still have to be able to get the ball over half court.
How about the Ohio State Buckeyes? Best case, worst case?
Yeah, I that's an interesting one because they have a lot of guys who were factors last year, but nobody other than CJ Jackson, who was a key guy beginning to end pretty much every game. The Wessons were contributing players, and that's not something that they're necessarily, you automatically go from being contributing to being great. So they have to have some of that work out for them. Guys who were situationally contributing last year to being regularly performing. Excuse me. And then I think some of their young players, some of their freshmen, they probably need more freshman contribution than almost anybody in the league.
All right, we've got 4 left. Penn State, best case, worst case?
Penn State, best case is their guards are good enough to support the front court. The front court is rock solid. Mike Watkins has to improve. He has to, like Nick Ward, he's got to improve at being able to stay in games. And then you've got to have guard play that not only just a playmaker, somebody that can get you into offense, but they need guys to make shots too. Because as good as those guys are in the front court, Josh Reeves and Lamar Stevens, they're not necessarily great shooters. Stevens can make a shot, but he's more of a scorer. Reeves is a great defender. And then can make a shot situationally, but they need some guys who can really shoot the basketball. I've been told that they've got freshmen that they're really happy with and really excited about. Those guys are going to have to play great basketball because right now I think Penn State really feels like they've got the next step is for them to make the tournament. They were so close a year ago, but the next step is to get there.
And Purdue, they're replacing a lot of guys, obviously. What's their best case and worst case?
Yeah, the best case scenario for them is Matt Harms is more by the end of the year. Matt Harms was really not a factor, and I think probably some of that was just the wear and tear every day in practice, going against Isaac Haas, and going against that, I think probably wore on him a little bit. So he needs to be really good beginning to end, able to play 20 plus minutes, 25 minutes maybe, and then they have to find the best way to maximize Carson Edwards' ability. I suspect that if there's anybody that can do that, it's Matt Painter. He's a terrific coach, and he's had Carson around for 3 years and understands what his best situations are, where best to get him the basketball.
What do you kind of see as the worst case for the Boilermakers?
Well, I think the worst case is that they're small. I mean, and small means Matt Harms doesn't play enough because of fouls or fatigue, and they don't really get the kind of contributions that they need off their reserve front court players. That could happen to them, and they won't be small at every position because they have in Nogel Eastern, one of the guys who I assume will start at point guard, and he'd be one of the biggest point guards in the league. I'm talking about small in the front court. I think that they'll figure out a way for Matt to be an effective player. I think we saw at the beginning of last year, there's a lot of things he can add. It's such great timing on shot blocks and such great vision for closing out on shooters. So I think that he'll be really effective. But there are scenarios in which that would not be would not be the reality.
And how about Rutgers? Is there any hope in Piscataway?
Yeah, I thought that they were really making a lot of progress last year. By the end of the year, they were somebody that everybody knew was difficult to play. And then I think the worst case scenario for them kind of happened in the spring in terms of this year. But in terms of, again, Rutgers is not an overnight build. I mean, they've been poor for too long. So for them, I think they're somewhat similar to Illinois. This is a culture in transition. And last year was a big step in that transition. Being a factor in New York was really good for them. The fact that they were so hard to play for a lot of teams, I think all that worked in their favor. So, I think Steve Peichel's going to do another good job this year. Again, their fans have to stay patient, but I think things are looking up for Rutgers, and they're about 2 players away from really being a good team in the league.
And I can't make any jokes about Rutgers because last time out they kicked our butt, so we got to go out and beat them again. And last one, best case, worst case for Wisconsin, which is really a team that I feel like has probably the biggest swing of opinions, between different people who analyze the Big Ten. So best case, worst case for them.
Well, best case for them is that Kobe King and Demetri Trice were that their absences were as punishing as we all allowed them to be while they were gone. Because we sort of, in the media said, okay, you get a mulligan for this because you had 2 major injuries. You were coming off the loss of several key regulars, and you had been great for 20 years in a row. So it's okay. But now those guys are going to have to be factors, and you're going to have to see more improvement in some of Wisconsin's supporting players. I don't think there's any question that healthy Brad Davison, healthy Ethan Happ, those guys, if those guys are 100%, they're going to have a couple great players, but they need to get more out of their supporting players than they did a year ago.
Whew, okay, that's all of them. Thank you for that, Mike. And any final thoughts here before we close up? Maybe as we look toward this exhibition game on Thursday night, anything that you think Indiana fans should in particular watch for? Obviously, you don't want to overreact to any type of exhibition game, but anything that you'll be kind of looking out for?
Yeah. Well, first of all, how is Romeo deployed, and what is he able to do with that? Who does he guard? Where do you play him in the offense? What do you want him to do? Do you want him to? You don't want him catching to shoot? Or do you want him to catch and drive? Do you want him? What do you? Because remember, a lot of that is based on how you run your offense. When Duke had J.J. Redick and they screened all day for him, it's not the same as what they did when they had Jabari Parker, for instance. So I think that'll be interesting to watch. And I don't want to dwell too much on the point guard thing, but I will be curious to see who starts the offense and how it gets going, and from there, does it still look like a weakness, or is it starting to look like it's covered? I think, again, you're not expecting to all of a sudden Isaiah Thomas or Yogi Ferrell to come charging out of the tunnel. But if you can cover that position, you are elite at multiple positions relative to your conference. So if you can cover that one, then you're in great shape.
Absolutely. Follow him on Twitter at TSN Mike. Read his work on the Sporting News. Watch him on BTN. Mike DeCourcy, thank you very much for joining us again here on Banner Monday.
Thanks, Jerod.
Okay, so coming up, it is time for another edition of Basketball 201 with Ben Ladner. We're going to talk more about ball screen defense this week, dissecting what it means to ice and trap and go under screens, the pros and cons of each approach. Stick with us here on the Assembly Call. That's next. Welcome back to Banner Monday. Here at the Assembly Call, we don't just want to make you a smarter IU basketball fan. We want to make you a smarter basketball fan, period. And that is the purpose of our Basketball 201 segments. You already know the basics of the game, but in this segment, we go next level to dissect the concepts and strategies that teams employ in the pursuit of victory. Pay attention to these segments, and you will have a deeper understanding of what's going on out there on the court while you're watching IU play. And here to continue our dissection of the many different ways that teams can defend ball screens is Ben Ladner, a senior at Indiana, one of our interns this season, and a future NBA editor at The Ringer or someplace else that values smart basketball writing and analysis. Ben, welcome back to Banner Monday. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. It's a very generous introduction.
It's going to happen. So a lot of really, really positive comments about last week's segment, which I'm obviously anytime you kind of try something out new, that it's great to get that kind of feedback. So really excited about that. We talked about ball screen defense, pick and roll defense last time. We talked about hedging and switching, hedging kind of the way that Indiana defended it a lot last year, switching something that, Archie Miller has talked about, that we've talked about Indiana possibly doing this year. So today we're going to talk about a few other ways that you can defend the ball screens, and I'll kind of turn it over to you to intro these, and then we'll go through some videos. And we've talked about, for the podcast listeners, trying to make it a little bit easier, for them to follow along, even if they don't watch the video. But you can always watch the video on YouTube. This is episode 433, and I will post a link in the show notes. This will be the third segment in that video, so just kind of scroll forward until you see me and Ben talking. Then you'll be able to see the video part of it as well. But over to you, Ben.
Yeah, so the three we've got today are ice, drop, drop, and trap, which there are two other ones that are, kind of in the mainstream, which are, showing and going under, but those are pretty self-explanatory, pretty simple, and maybe not worth going into a ton of depth on. But the first one I want to start with is ice, which is maybe my personal, favorite way of defending the pick and roll. It's certainly very common in the NBA. Tom Thibodeau was one of the pioneers of this style. You Bulls fans and Timberwolves fans probably will recognize, his voice shouting "ice, ice, ice" on Timberwolves broadcasts at his players. It's pretty widely used across the NBA. Maybe not so much in college, but basically, it's what happens is I've got a clip here: Grizzlies versus Spurs. This is from last season. It's on side pick and roll. So this is only on side pick and rolls. If the ball handler is set up in the middle, if it's a high pick and roll, or if they're trying, to go toward the sideline, it doesn't quite work as well. But the basic offensive setup here is that you've got a pick and roll. Tyreek Evans right here on the right wing gets the screen from Marc Gasol, wants to go left, which is to the middle. The entire point of icing the pick and roll is to prevent the offense from going middle, because like we touched on last time, the middle is probably the most vulnerable part of a defense, other than maybe, a wide open corner three. But if a ball handler gets to the middle, they've got so many options available to them. They can shoot it, they can kick out for a three, they can pass it to a guy. There's usually a guy in the short corner, and these days they're expanding out just to the corner, but for a dunk or a layup. So there's just a lot of different options. Think about a guy like James Harden in the pick and roll with Clint Capella. When he gets into the lane, there's just so many choices available to him that the defense is kind of cooked if that happens. So here, Tyreek Evans, they want to get this pick and roll going middle, and that'll set up kick out threes. It'll set up a roll with Gasol, or maybe even a basket for Evans himself. And so what you see here is the Spurs ice pretty much every side pick and roll. They're one of the best in the league. In particular, Danny Green is one of the best players in the league at executing this. So Evans, you can see him kind of hesitate there. He wants to go middle, but what Danny Green does is watch how when the screen comes, he angles his body right there. He jumps toward the screen and almost gets parallel to the sideline with his chest facing the near sideline, right like that. Low in a stance. This is great defense by Danny Green. And he is absolutely not going to allow Tyreek Evans to turn that corner and get into the middle. He's forcing him to go to the sideline. And the whole point here is that the guard, in this case Danny Green, and the big man, LaMarcus Aldridge, they want to force this guy to kind of this, no man's land mid-range corner area over here on the right side. And so when Tyreek Evans, you can see him here, wants to go middle, instead goes with kind of an in and out dribble. And it looks like Danny Green's beat, right? And this is one of the things that I thought about a lot when I first saw, when I was kind of digging into this when I was maybe 5 years younger. about, it looks like guys are getting beat, but that's just part of the scheme. You see Kawhi Leonard do this a lot, where it looks like the guy's just gotten by him, but really he's forcing his man into the help defense, which is what this scheme is all about. So Evans drives right, and LaMarcus Aldridge rotating from the free throw line. He's got Gasol, but when this drive comes, it's incumbent upon this big man to provide the help. And so they don't get the trap over here on the right side, but LaMarcus Aldridge able to rotate over, stays vertical, contests the layup, beautiful job, and Evans, is forced to take a tough shot, which he misses. One thing to note here, you might be thinking, why doesn't he just hit Marc Gasol on the pop? Because Gasol just kind of, fills to space here. Watch Patty Mills coming over from the weak side, where when Evans drives, if he stunts over. So if Evans wants to make that pass, Patty Mills is right there. And he's playing in between Gasol, and I think this is James Ennis over here on the weak side. So if Evans tries to make this cross-court pass, boom, Patty's in the passing lane there. If he tries to bounce it to Gasol, he's in the passing lane there. If he does go to Gasol, Mills will close out here, and you kind of it's just a, close out to whichever man is open kind of thing for the rest of the defense, because while these two guys who are guarding the ball primarily
down in the paint, guarding the ball.
Yeah, so while Aldridge and Green are taking care of the ball, these other three guys are basically zoning up on the other four offensive players and trying to prevent those cross-court passes and kind of just, if the ball gets over to one of these wing guys, whoever's closest to the ball just closes out, and that's called an X out, where you kind of just close out to the open positions wherever they may be. So Mills steps over, does a great job taking away that pass, and Tyreke Evans, no other options, and ends up missing the layup.
So buried in there was an interesting little comment that you said. 5 years ago, were you studying pick and roll coverages? were you doing this when you were in high school?
Studying, more of just watching the game. And I would look at these like guys who had great defensive reputations, and I was like, well, he's not that good at defense. He's getting beat off the dribble all the time. But then you kind of realize, like, oh, that's the whole point. And Kawhi was one of the first guys that I kind of realized that with.
Yeah. Well, okay, so why don't more college teams do this? I mean, it obviously seems like you've really got to have everybody on the same page. And, like you said, I mean, Patty Mills has to immediately recognize what's happening, rotate over. Why don't we see more college teams use this? Because it seems like a really effective way to guard it, on the side.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm actually not entirely sure. I would probably experiment with it a little bit more if I were a college coach. Maybe
because they don't have enough practice time. I mean,
yeah, it could be that. It does require that almost like hedging. It doesn't require quite as much connectedness across all five guys as hedging does, but it's similar in the sense that you really need all five players to be tied in and operating at the same time. It could be because of the spacing differences. I'm not really entirely sure, to be honest, but I definitely would experiment with it more if I were a coach.
Yeah. Okay.
And if anyone has any insight as to why that may be, I'd be happy to hear it.
Yeah. No, I don't know. Okay. You want to hit up the next one?
Yeah, let's look at the next one. So this is maybe the most conventional coverage, both in college and the NBA. It's a drop, which, is kind of what it sounds like. It's pretty self-explanatory.
This game doesn't bring back good memories.
What's that?
So this game doesn't bring back good memories.
No, this was not. I was broadcasting this game. This was not a great showing for Indiana. As you can see, it is already a 14-point game, just about 12 minutes in. So not great. This was kind of the low point of their season in many ways. But a pretty good defensive possession here, one of the few in this game from Indiana, obviously against Michigan. 24-10, Michigan's up, but you got a pick and roll here. I think this is I can't even remember this guy's name, number 55 on Michigan, backup point guard. He's driving against Josh Newkirk, and Michigan, very NBA style offense. They run a pick and roll. Mo Wagner comes up to set the screen, and Juwan Morgan guarding Mo Wagner. Basically, he just comes level to the screen. Sometimes you'll see this big man maybe step a couple feet off, maybe down here by the free throw line at the elbow. Some guys like, Pau Gasol is a guy in the NBA. Maybe with a guy like Deron Davis, some of these slower big men who can't get all the way up to the level of the screen. Sometimes you'll see them drop a little farther back. But Morgan goes to the level of the screen while Newkirk fights over. So Josh Newkirk, he runs into the screen, but he gets over the top of it. Ideally, he would stay on the ball handler's hip. He does a pretty good job here because he gets across it quickly. But ideally, you want to stay attached to that ball handler, stay on his hip, and get over that screen. And so Juwan Morgan, his job basically is to contain this guy for as long as it takes Newkirk to get over the screen. And when he does, you just drop back to Mo Wagner. And so you have a little bit of help side defense here from Devontae Green, whose man is standing here in the corner. If the offense is really quick and they're able to create enough separation, they can throw this skip pass over here into the left corner. But that really takes a lot of coordination and precision because of just how quickly these things happen. So Green does a good job here stunting down and then getting back out to his man. Michigan's forced to kick it out, and they don't really have anywhere to go. So Morgan and Newkirk do a really nice job here where basically, I'll show the clip one more time. Morgan comes out, sticks with it, and then just kind of drops back to Mo Wagner. And you want to kind of keep that space as tight as you can without letting the big man, slip down to the basket. It can be tougher to contain when the big man can pop because, like we showed with that Indiana State game, you're able to create a little bit more separation along the perimeter and then force the defense into some longer rotations.
So is this a pretty common coverage that you'll see?
Yeah, this is pretty common, especially in the NBA and college teams. I think this is probably the most common coverage you'll see just because you can basically do it with two guys and it doesn't require guys running all over the place and having to, it's not like hedging where you're asking your big man to get all the way out on the floor. You're not asking, a big man to switch onto a faster guy that he can't contain. It's a good kind of medium between being aggressive and being, more conventional.
By the way, in the chat, Coach Tonsoni, back to our conversation about icing and why maybe more teams don't do it. He said it takes quick recognition, which makes it difficult. The ball handler, the guy guarding the ball handler, you have to force the ball baseline, and if not,
right,
the coverage is busted.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I think that's the other thing is if it's probably a higher risk kind of defense, which is why you see it more in the NBA because those defenders are just so much better and they're able to execute it a little bit better. Where like in college, if you screw up ice defense, then, like I said, the defense is kind of cooked if the guy gets into the middle because your help defense is all out of whack. It's all predicated on forcing a guy to one part of the floor. So if you're not able to do that and you get compromised, then it can be especially crippling.
So where can dropping really hurt you? Like, where's the big weakness in this one?
I would say, if this guard, like if Newkirk, let's say Mo Wagner sets a really solid screener, this is just like a really wide screener who's just going to hammer you. If the guy guarding the ball takes a long time to get around the screen, it can be vulnerable to dribble penetration where you have, like if this ball handler is able to get around Juwan Morgan here and drive middle, that can often be a weak spot. And then you're asking Zach McRoberts here guarding the weak side corner. You're asking him to step up, guard the paint, and then you have this kick out three to the corner. It can also, if Devontae Green doesn't help down enough here, you can hit Michigan would be able to hit Mo Wagner on the roll. And then if he helps down too much, then like I said, you've got this skip pass available to the shooter in the corner, which is something that a lot of NBA teams look for against the drop, is they just try to pull one of these help side defenders into the paint and then look for one of those corner shooters.
You mentioned Danny Green and how good of a defensive player he is, and really probably underrated for his defense.
Yeah.
As you watch Devontae, obviously Danny's brother, do you see any kind of similarities defensively there? I mean, Devontae's obviously much younger, has
right,
some maturing to do, but do you see any similarities between those two?
I think there are similarities in that they are both good defenders, but as far as the style of defense, Danny Green is, he's not like a great athlete. He's not the quickest guy. He's not the most explosive. He's not super fast. Like you watch him run up and down the floor and he looks kind of slow, honestly. But like I showed in that clip where he's just so good at executing and he knows where to be and he always rotates on time and he knows exactly what the scheme is and how to execute it. Whereas Devontae is more kind of, get up in your jersey and slide laterally, stay with a guy. He's got really quick hands. He's able to knock the ball away, which I guess is a similarity with Danny. Danny Green is maybe the best transition guard defender of all time. Like his ability to block shots in transition, it's uncanny. It's like every time an opponent gets a fast break and Danny Green is hustling down the court to defend a layup, you just know it's going to get blocked because it's Danny Green, and he always does that. And he's also bigger. Danny Green's about 6'6". Devontae's only about 6'2".
Yeah.
So there are some differences there. Devontae's not as versatile. Danny can guard, 3, sometimes 4 positions, whereas Devontae's probably a 1 or 2 position defender. But as far as those quick hands, I think Devontae's recognition is actually pretty good. or it was for a young guy. Now that he's a junior, that's kind of more the expectation. But even in his freshman and sophomore years, I thought his instincts and his recognition were pretty good. And I'm sure that's, either runs in the family or that's something that Danny's kind of imparted upon him.
Yeah. Another thing from Coach in the chat, which I think is a good point, the pack line defense, which Indiana plays under Archie Miller, sends, the ball to the middle, which is, kind of the whole point, funnel the ball to the middle, which is the opposite of icing, where you're trying to, send guys down to the corner. So that can make the coverage difficult for pack line teams just because it's the opposite of what you're kind of doing the rest of the time. So,
yeah.
Speaking of Coach, he sent in a couple of questions. So let's get to a couple of those now. One is, okay, so what action is most dangerous in the pick and roll, and what type of defense is best to prevent that action? As you said, kind of on a whole, obviously scouting would kind of determine that. But what do you think is the most dangerous action?
Probably the kick out three or the lob dunk. Like I said, a lot of attacking drop coverages is trying to pull in those weak side defenders and kick out to corner 3-point shooters. Again, I'll bring up James Harden as the example, where he just does such a good job putting pressure when he gets in the middle, puts so much pressure on the defense that, when the help defenders have to sag in, he just recognizes that immediately. LeBron's another guy who does this. They recognize immediately when the defender's leaning, and they just throw the pass right by them at the exact moment when they lean the wrong way. So that can be really dangerous. And then if you don't cover that lob man, I think of a guy like Clint Capella or Rudy Gobert in the NBA, where they just have people talk a lot about gravity from a 3-point standpoint, where a guy who is a good shooter, you have to stay tight to him so you're not able to help off of him, which is all true. But there's also gravity from a lob standpoint, where a really great roll man, a guy who's just like prime DeAndre Jordan, who's just going to dunk everything around the basket. You have to come down and tag that guy from the weak side. You have to make sure that he can't get up to get that lob, which can unlock those weak side, cross court passes for threes. And if you don't come over to take that lob away, and you have an elite finisher above the rim, then you can just throw the ball up and he's going to dunk it. So, really it kind of depends on the coverages. Offenses will attack pick and roll differently depending on what kind of coverage they play. So like against a hedge, like IU does, I think getting rid of the ball quickly and finding that quick release where you're able to get that momentary 4-on-3 advantage and make plays out of that is really crucial. Because if you allow the defense to recover before you're able to press that advantage, then you're basically back to square one and you haven't gone anywhere. But, we saw ISU do this in the first game of last season, where they release the ball quickly. They find that big man popping or rolling. Golden State does this a lot with Draymond Green, like on those short rolls. You just get rid of the ball quickly and you've got that 4-on-3. And so you're either going to get a layup, a lob, or a kick out three. And that can be really, really dangerous for a team.
So, we've talked now about, I think, 5 different coverages, and Coach asked this question too. Is it better to defend a pick and roll several ways or to master 1 and 2? Because, one thing about Tom Crean is he, tried a lot of these different ways and, would try and switch defenses in the middle of possessions, which theoretically probably made a lot of sense and was, utterly brilliant. But you have to be able to explain that to players and actually have to be able to execute it in the heat of the moment. So, and maybe that is a reason why college teams don't, do have a whole lot of real complicated coverages and try and master a couple, is because you just don't have unlimited practice time. Like, not that the professionals have unlimited time, but it's not like the college where you have rules on that kind of stuff. So what do you think, especially for a college team, would you rather just master 1 or 2 of them, or try and, have a different one for every situation that you could encounter?
Yeah, I think it's personnel dependent, both, your own team and then your opponent. So like, if you're playing a team that has, let's say Steph Curry, we're playing college basketball, and just a guy who can pull up, Nate Mason, Carson Edwards, a guy who can pull up for 3 off the pick and roll, then you're probably not going to play a drop coverage against them.
Yogi Ferrell, Victor Oladipo. We need to work on our references here.
Exactly. You're probably not going to play a drop coverage against those guys because they're going to come around that screen. And even if, the guard is attached and stays tight to their hip, that momentary separation they get, that little window where the guard's recovering and the big man has to contain that drive, they're going to pull up for 3. And if the big man steps up and really comes out and takes that away, then they're hitting the roll man for a layup or a kick out 3 or something. You keep the chain moving that way. So against that sort of team, against that sort of guard, you might run a hedge or a trap or maybe just a straight switch. Against teams that have like an elite one-on-one creator, you probably don't want to switch. because, that team can that one guy can burn you in isolations. If you have a team whose big men can shoot threes like Indiana State, you probably don't want to run a hedging defense because they can pop and they can hurt you with the pick and pop threes. So I think it depends on which teams you're playing. Personally, I do think it is better to master, 2 or 3 coverages maybe, just so you can have that alternative. If you face a guy who can really exploit one particular coverage, you can turn to something else. But I don't know that mixing in 4, 5, 6 different types of pick and roll coverages is necessarily the easiest thing to do for a college team. Sometimes you'll see NBA teams do it, especially in the playoffs, where you're able to game plan for an opponent for a week, and you have all this big sample on them, and you can kind of make adjustments and change things up. But over the course of a college season, it's just so hard to constantly adjust your pick and roll defense over the course of a game to game kind of thing, let alone quarter to quarter, possession to possession. So yeah, I think every team probably has some type of drop coverage in their system. That's just, it's such a conventional way to defend it. Indiana even did that late last season, where they would start dropping their guys like that Michigan game, as opposed to hedging. But then they also have their base defense, which for IU was hedging.
Yeah, and I'm sure if you have an experienced team where you know your standard ways just down cold, then maybe you have a little bit more freedom. If you're facing a big game or a particularly good player that you want to put in a little wrinkle, and you've got some experienced guys to do it, you probably have a little bit more leeway. And if you've got a really young team, you probably don't want to confuse them too much, and you just want to get good at your standard stuff, because ultimately, you're going to give up some, but that's ultimately going to be better because at least you can hang your hat on something.
Yeah.
So great stuff. Did you have any others that you wanted to go over?
I've got one more, which is, we can touch on pretty quickly here.
Yeah, let's hit it. Let's hit it quickly before we close.
What's that?
Let's hit it quickly before we close.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
It's the trap, which Indiana didn't do a whole lot of last season. So I've actually got another NBA clip here. Sorry for all the people who aren't into the NBA who are watching this, for all these pro basketball clips. But traps are pretty self-explanatory. I'll play the clip here where Golden State Warriors, San Antonio Spurs. This is Steph Curry, obviously not a guy you want to leave open. And Golden State, as soon as the pick is set, they immediately trap. Pau Gasol guarding Draymond Green. This is the top of the key for those who are not watching. Pau Gasol and Patty Mills immediately just spring to the ball. And Steph Curry, he's seen this a million times, drops it over the top to Draymond Green, one dribble, lob to Sean Livingston.
God, they made that look easy.
The Warriors, it's a good point. They are maybe the best team in the NBA at doing this, because watch, when Draymond catches it, he's got Ian Clark in the corner for a three if this guy helps too far down on him. He's got the layup if no one comes up to stop him. And he's got this weak side three if Danny Green comes in to help on the lob man. So what ends up happening is Dwayne Dedman, steps up and he throws the lob to Livingston. Now let's say Danny Green comes down and takes away Livingston. Well, then that's an easy kick to the corner to, I think this is Iguodala. So, it's that idea of having that 4-on-3 advantage where, for Golden State Warriors, especially when it's Draymond Green making the decisions, one of the best passing big men in the NBA, against a 3-man defensive unit, essentially, it's just an impossible situation that you're in. And so, this is quintessential Warriors, lobs it up top, uncontested. They did this 3 or 4 times last night against the Brooklyn Nets. This is, not every team can do this. You're not going to see every college team with a guy like Draymond Green who can, take the ball out of a trap and just throw it up to a guard.
He's so decisive with it once he gets it. He's just going.
Exactly.
So let's say, like, if this was a mortal offense with a normal guard out there 35 feet from the basket that you're trapping, what's the goal here? Like, you're trying to harass him into a turnover? You're just trying to disrupt the timing?
You're either trying to force a quick turnover or just get the ball out of his hands. A lot of the times you'll see this when a guy gets really hot and he hits 3 or 4 or 5 shots in a row. Maybe something like Corey Sanders did to IU in the Big Ten tournament, where a guy just catches absolute fire and you're like, okay, we're just going to make someone else beat us. And you want to get the ball out of their hands. So this is kind of a more extreme version of hedging in many ways, where, you bring the big man out. So you say, okay, instead of having him hedge and recover, we're just going to bring him all the way out and try to force a turnover while we're at it. And obviously it does force you into that tough situation because you're surrendering that 4-on-3 advantage. But at the very least, you have the chance of forcing a turnover. And you're also not letting this guy who presumably, if you're trapping him, is unconscious, you're not letting him just beat you over the top with threes.
And most people don't have Draymond Green as the roll man who can then take it and just kill you going down the lane.
Yeah, so you can, maybe force that big man into a turnover if he's not, if it's Deron Davis even, who's a pretty good passer, but he's not a guy who's going to take that one dribble on the run, throw the lob, not as decisive a decision maker or as crisp a passer.
Yeah. Man, Ben, good stuff as always. I'm learning a ton from these segments. I see all the comments in the chat from people who are too. So this continues to be good. I
appreciate people listening.
What do you want to cover next week or in the ones moving forward? I know we've kicked a few things around via email.
I'll leave that up to you.
You want to do some offense stuff next?
Yeah, my only reservation with that would be that we just don't have a big sample size yet on the current team. So I don't know that there's
maybe we do some pack line. Maybe next week we'll just do
a good one to do, and then we'll have the scrimmage and opening night and everything that we can dive into after that.
All right, let's do that. Last question for you: what are you going to be watching for Thursday night?
Oh man, well, first of all, what kind of defense they run. We've spent the last 2 weeks talking about pick and roll defense, so I'll be really interested to see that.
And there's a team with a couple good shooters too. They got a couple guys. We'll talk about this in the preview coming up, but they got a couple of guys who can 35-36% from downtown.
Yeah, so.
Interesting to see how they handle that.
Yeah, and then with the personnel, I'll also be interested to see who starts. I don't think it's a sure thing that Deron Davis is in the starting lineup. I could very well see Evan Fitzner starting. I expect that Justin Smith to probably start. Obviously, you'll have Juwan and Romeo Langford in there with presumably Devontae Green. But what does the point guard rotation look like? How many minutes will Rob Finney get now? And compare that to how many minutes he's getting in February. So just kind of where these guys start in their rotation and where we expect them to be at the end of the year. I think Fitzner in particular is going to play a really big role for this team. I would start him if it were me, just because I think you need his floor spacing, his IQ. He seems, from the limited taste we got at Hoosier Hysteria, he seems like a guy who just knows what he's doing on the court. He looked really good in the dribble handoff game, setting guys up, popping for three, just looked like he belonged. And so I'll be really interested to see how he fits with Indiana's best players. And then if Deron Davis isn't in that starting lineup, what kind of role does he play? Is he coming off the bench as the sixth man? Is he kind of an anchor for those second units? I had a piece come out today about him kind of previewing his season. And I think he should come off the bench, not because he's a bad player, just because I think that the style that they'll play with their best players off the floor better suits his game. I think he'll have more touches available to him when he's not trying to share the ball with Romeo and Juwan. And you can just kind of maximize him a little bit better that way. So that's kind of the starting center spot and pick and roll coverage are the two biggest things that I'll be interested in.
That's a great piece. That's it. Inside the Hall in the player-by-player preview. Some really good analysis on Deron there. All right, Ben. Well, thank you. And we look forward to doing this again next week, man.
Looking forward to it.
This is good stuff.
Awesome.
All righty. Coming up here, it is time for our first opponent preview of the season. Indiana plays an actual game on Thursday night, an exhibition against Southern Indiana. Just because it doesn't count doesn't mean we can't take it seriously, so we'll do a quick preview. Stick with us here on the Assembly Call. Welcome back to Banner Monday. Each week here in our final segment, we will dedicate it to previewing Indiana's upcoming opponent for that week. It's going to be on Monday, so, for the Monday night game, typically the Tuesday night game. Not a ton of Monday or Wednesday games this year, but a lot of Tuesday games as usual. So we'll use this segment to preview them. I'll try to have experts who probably know more about these teams than I do. But this week, Indiana plays its first and only public exhibition game against the Southern Indiana Screaming Eagles. And so we don't need to go too in-depth about it, but I just want to give you a few nuggets so that you can take these into watching the game on Thursday night. And, of course, the game Thursday night, not on television, but it is on BTN Plus, so you need to get your BTN Plus account so that you can watch it. And we will, of course, have a post-game show immediately after it. It's like our warm-up. I think both Andy and Ryan will be there, so we gotta get a warm up doing a post game show. It's been a while, man, since March 1st, and the last one we did was not fun. So certainly look forward to this one being a lot more fun post game show than that last one was. But Southern Indiana, they are in Division II. They are in the Great Lakes Valley, and they were picked to finish 4th in their conference. So they're not a great Division II team. They're not like Bellarmine, who Indiana has played in the past. One of the best teams in Division II. This is a little bit more of a middle-of-the-road, type team in Division II. They do return 3 of their top 6 scorers from last season, and they're led by a couple of seniors. And so this is where, if you're looking for, what part of this team may challenge Indiana, I think it's the fact that they have a couple of guys in the backcourt on the wing who are good shooters. And we saw last year, Indiana didn't always fare well against these types of teams. So they're led by their senior, Alex Stein. He's a 6'3" guard. He was a preseason honorable mention All-America for Division II. Last year, he averaged 17.5 points per game as a junior. He shot 38.6% from deep on, a decent amount of attempts. So the guy's a good shooter. And interestingly, he shot 93.5% from the free throw line, and he made 54 free throws in a row last year, which is too shy of Jordan Hull's record of 56. So anytime you're in the same sentence as Jordan Hulls, you can shoot the ball. So this guy can shoot it. He's experienced, probably not going to be a guy that, cowers in the moment at Simon Scott Assembly Hall, even though it'll be a big moment for him. So how does Indiana defend him? They also return a senior in Nate Hansen, who's a 6'4" wing. He was their second leading scorer last year, 35.6% from downtown. You would certainly expect that Indiana will be better at defending, backcourt wing players like this year with the added length that they have with a guy like Romeo Langford at 6'6", who despite being a freshman is still going to be really difficult for these guys to deal with from an athletic ability perspective. But, is Indiana, we know that Southern Indiana is going to want to get these guys 3-pointers. How is Indiana's 3-point defense? Are they closing out better, or are they less prone to the breakdowns that really got them in trouble in some of their poor performances last year? That's kind of the one thing when you look at this team that'll be, kind of the matchup thing that you really want to see. I mean, Indiana's going to overwhelm them with talent and athletic ability and probably win the game by 40 or 50 points. But that's one of the things that I'm really going to be looking for is how do they defend these wing guys? Are they able to prevent them from getting the kind of looks downtown that they want, because that's not something that Indiana was always good at last year. They also return a sophomore, Emmanuel Little, who's a 6'6" forward. He's the tallest returnee. He was their 4th leading scorer last year. Just not a lot of size outside of that. They have a couple of newcomers, 6'8", 250, Josh Price, 6'7", 273, Tyler Dancy. These are big, beefy guys. Neither one has really been, a super productive player. One guy transferred, another guy's a freshman. Neither one really, has shown a lot of productivity. They have a transfer from Utah, Colby Caldwell, also hasn't shown a lot of productivity. So, not a whole lot else to go on outside of those top guys. But again, it's an exhibition game. You're at home. This is a game that you should dominate, but it'll be interesting to see how Indiana defends these guys. And I think just keys to watch, I think Ben hit on some of them. He kind of talked about Deron Davis starting. I guess, and I don't really know anything, but I'd kind of be surprised if Deron plays. And so I guess that will be interesting to watch, because I really just don't feel like I have a very good idea of how ready he is. Like, we've seen him in some of those practice videos being out there, being active. It looks like, kind of absorbing some contact and playing in some, in some full contact type drills. But it'll be interesting to see. I mean, if he gets in there and plays, then we'll know that he's, kind of at a certain spot in his rehabilitation from the Achilles. And if he doesn't play at all, that's obviously a sign that, that he's not ready to get back out there, because you would think at a minimum, if he's ready to go, you'd want him to get out there and get at least a 3-4 minute run in a game just to help him from a conditioning standpoint. So, we'll see. And, we'll see what the, who is out there from a guard perspective, what just the starting lineup is. And then I think it'll be interesting to see where Archie goes first on the bench. Not to say that the rotations that we're going to see in an exhibition game are going to be the same as, the ones we'll see later in the season, but I think it will be a good indication of, who's practicing the best, who at this stage in the season has kind of positioned themselves atop the rotation, either to start or be one of the first few guys off the bench. And so it'll just be interesting to see if there's any surprises there, guys we're not expecting to be in there. But other than that, should be a fun night. I mean, I don't think any of us really care. Just from the reaction people had to watching the short Hoosier Hysteria scrimmage, we don't really care who Indiana's playing at this point. We just want to see some action. We want a real game against somebody else that we saw with our own 2 eyes that we can react to. We're going to try our best on the post-game show not to overreact, but we're certainly going to have fun talking about our first Indiana basketball game since March 1st. My goodness, it's been too long. So we look forward to it. We hope that you will join us. We will be live immediately following the game. Should be live on YouTube, Periscope, and Facebook. As always, YouTube is the best place to watch the game because you can hang out with the chat mob.
Chat mobbers.
And break it all down there in the chat on the post-game show. So without any further ado, that'll do it here on this week's episode of Banner Monday. If you want to see us do the show live and be part of the live chat, Join us at assemblycall.com on Monday afternoons for the live broadcast of our Banner Monday recording. And you can always subscribe to our podcast by searching for Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, go to assemblycall.com or text IU to 66866 to join our free email newsletter, which will make you a smarter and more well-informed IU basketball fan. Thank you for listening. We'll be back to talk IU hoops again with you on Thursday night. Until then, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim. And go Hoosiers.
Thank everybody for coming out.
This was the most ridiculous ordeal of my life.
Thank you for being here and for listening to this episode of the Assembly Call. We appreciate it. And we really do rely on the support of audience members like you to keep our show going and to keep growing. And so we have set up a page on our website at assemblycall.com/support that lists 5 ways that you can support the Assembly Call. And we encourage you to choose whichever method is the easiest and most convenient for you. One of the methods is donating, and so many of you have donated, and we appreciate it so much. On that page, you can choose a monthly recurring donation or an annual recurring donation or just a one-time donation, whatever works for you. And if you don't want to donate, another way to support the show is you can use our affiliate URLs, iutickets.shop or iustore.shop when you're going to shop for tickets or gear, and we will get paid a small commission when you use those links. But however you support the show, we appreciate it. Thank you.